My lazy wife demanded a divorce after inheriting her granddad's $5 million. A high school graduate don't fit my lifestyle anymore. I replied, "You're right." She served me papers in court, only to see her mother, the city's most feared, expensive divorce attorney, sit down next to me. She looked at her and said, "He doesn't have to convince me. You are. You know how they say your whole life can change in a single moment? Well, let me tell you something. Whoever said that wasn't kidding. My name's Jackson Ward, and up until 3 weeks ago, I thought I had my life pretty much figured out. Sure, it wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I've been working as a maintenance supervisor at Roosevelt High School for 14 years now, and honestly, I was good at it. Really good. The kids respected me. The teachers actually listened when I told them their classroom heaters were acting up, and I took pride in keeping that old brick building running like clockwork. But let's back up a bit. I need to tell you about Brielle, my wife. Well, soon-to-be ex-wife, but we'll get to that part. We'd been married for 9 years, and man, what a ride those 9 years were. When I first met her at that little coffee shop downtown, she was this whirlwind of energy and big dreams. She had this way of talking about the future like it was this magical place where everything would just fall into place. I fell hard for that optimism, that spark she had. Problem was, that spark never seemed to land on anything long enough to actually catch fire. In our 9 years together, Brielle bounced from job to job like she was playing hopscotch. First it was real estate. Lasted about 6 months before she decided her broker was totally toxic and didn't appreciate her vision. Then came the whole MLM phase with those essential oils. God, our garage still smells like peppermint and desperation from all those starter kits she never sold. After that, it was graphic design, even though she'd never touched Photoshop in her life. She signed up for online courses, bought all the software, set up this whole home office in our spare bedroom. 3 weeks later, she was complaining that digital art just wasn't her calling. Don't get me wrong, I supported her through all of it. Every career change, every business opportunity, every bright idea that fizzled out faster than a wet firecracker. I believed in her, you know. When she wanted to try yoga instruction, I helped convert the basement into a studio. When she got into that jewelry making phase, I built her a whole workbench with proper lighting and everything. Hell, I even helped her set up that online boutique where she was going to sell curated vintage pieces, which was really just stuff she bought at thrift stores and marked up 400%. Through it all, I kept showing up to work every morning at 6 a.m., fixing broken lockers and unclogging toilets and making sure those kids had a safe, clean place to learn. My paycheck might not have been impressive, but it was steady. It kept the lights on, put food on the table, and covered Brielle's latest adventures in entrepreneurship. I thought we were a team, you know? Sure, she got frustrated sometimes when money was tight, especially when her friends would post about their fancy vacations or designer handbags on social media. But I figured that's just how marriage worked. You take the good with the bad, support each other through the rough patches, and keep building something together. Then 3 weeks ago, everything changed. Brielle's grandfather, this old guy named Harold who I'd only met twice in 9 years, passed away. Now, Harold was one of those quiet rich guys. Lived in the same modest house for 40 years, drove a 15-year-old Buick, wore the same 3 sweaters in rotation. You'd never guess the man was loaded. But apparently, he'd been quietly building this investment portfolio for decades, and when the lawyers read his will, Brielle inherited $5 million. $5 million. I remember the exact moment she got the call. She was sitting at our kitchen table, still in her pajamas at 2 in the afternoon, scrolling through her phone looking for her next big opportunity. When her cousin Marcus called with the news, I watched her face go through about 15 different emotions in the span of 30 seconds. Shock, disbelief, excitement, and then something else, something that made my stomach drop even though I couldn't name it at the time. That night, after she'd spent the whole day calling everyone she knew to share the news, I figured we'd finally sit down and talk about what this meant for us. Maybe we could pay off the mortgage, take that trip to Europe she'd always talked about, or hell, maybe I could finally take some time off, and we could just enjoy being together without the constant stress about money. Instead, Brielle sat across from me at our little dining table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, where we'd planned our future, where I'd helped her brainstorm business names and calculate startup costs. and she looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before. It was cold, calculating, like she was seeing me for the first time and didn't much like what she was looking at. "Jackson," she said, and her voice had this weird formal tone to it. "I've been doing some thinking." I leaned forward, ready to hear about investment strategies, or maybe plans to start that boutique hotel she'd always dreamed about. Instead, she crossed her arms and said the words that would echo in my head for weeks. "I need someone who fits my lifestyle now. A high school graduate just won't cut it anymore. I want a divorce." Just like that. No build-up, no gentle letdown, no acknowledgement of the 9 years we'd spent building a life together. She slid this manila folder across the table like she was handing over a report at some corporate meeting. Her tone was smug, not sad, not apologetic, just satisfied. Like she'd finally figured out how to upgrade from an old phone to the latest model. I sat there staring at that folder, and for a moment, I couldn't even process what was happening. This was the woman I'd supported through every failed venture, every crisis of confidence, every 2 a.m. breakdown about not knowing what she wanted to do with her life. The woman I'd built furniture for, cooked dinner for when she was too stressed to function, held when she cried about feeling like a failure. And now, with $5 million in her future bank account, I was suddenly not good enough. Too blue-collar. Too ordinary. Too much of a reminder of the life she wanted to leave behind. I looked up at her, sitting there in her designer pajamas that I'd bought her for Christmas, in the house my uncle had left me, at the table I'd refinished with my own hands. She had this little smile playing at the corners of her mouth, like she'd already won some game I didn't even know we were playing. That's when I said the 2 words that would change everything. "You're right." Her smile faltered just a bit, like maybe she'd expected me to fight or beg or promise to become someone different. But I didn't, because in that moment, sitting in the wreckage of what I thought was my marriage, something clicked into place. She was right. We didn't fit anymore. But not for the reasons she thought. And that's when everything began to change. You'd think that after dropping a divorce bomb like that, Brielle might have shown a little restraint, maybe even some basic human decency. Hell, I would have settled for her pretending to feel bad about it for like 5 minutes. But no, that inheritance money hadn't even hit her account yet, and she was already acting like some sort of corporate shark who'd just smelled blood in the water. The next morning, I woke up to find her sitting at our kitchen counter with her laptop open, a stack of printed papers beside her, and this predatory smile that made my skin crawl. She'd been up since God knows when, and from the looks of it, she'd been busy. Real busy. "Morning, Jackson," she said, not even looking up from whatever she was typing. "I hope you slept well, because we need to talk business." Business. Like our 9-year marriage was just some failed startup she needed to liquidate. She slid another folder across the counter. This one was thicker than the first, with little colored tabs sticking out the sides like she'd organized the whole thing with the precision of a military operation. "I had my lawyer draw up the specifics," she said, finally looking at me with those cold eyes that used to light up when I walked into a room. I opened the folder, and I swear to God, it was like reading a hit list with my name at the top. She didn't just want out of our marriage. She wanted to strip me down to nothing and leave me standing in the wreckage. First item, the house. My house. The 3-bedroom ranch that my Uncle Tommy had left me when he passed 5 years ago. The place where I'd spent my childhood summers learning how to fix things with my own hands. The house I'd completely renovated, room by room, turning it from a fixer-upper into something we could be proud of. She wanted it. All of it. "This house has appreciated significantly since your uncle's death," she said, like she was reading from some real estate manual. "Given that we've been married for 9 years, I'm entitled to at least half the equity. But considering I'll need a place that's more suitable for my new circumstances, I think it's only fair that I get the whole property." Fair. She used the word fair while trying to steal the roof over my head. But that wasn't even the worst part. She wanted 80% of our joint savings, money that I'd earned with 14 years of getting up before dawn, dealing with broken boilers and flooded bathrooms and the 1,000 little emergencies that keep a school running. Money that had paid for every single one of her failed business ventures, every course she'd signed up for and quit, every investment opportunity that turned out to be another dead end. Then there was my car. My 2018 Ford F-150 that I'd saved up for 2 years to buy, that I'd paid off with my own sweat and overtime hours. She wanted that too, claiming that since we were married when I bought it, it was marital property. Never mind that she'd never driven it, never helped with the payments, never even liked the thing because it wasn't fancy enough for her taste. And the cherry on top of this whole shit sundae? Alimony. She wanted me to pay her monthly support while she figured out her next chapter with her newfound wealth. The woman who was about to inherit $5 million wanted the guy who made 48 grand a year fixing toilets to send her a check every month. I must have been quiet for too long, because she leaned back in her chair and gave me this look, like a cat that had just cornered a mouse and was deciding whether to play with it first or just go for the kill. "Jackson," she said, and her voice had this fake sweetness to it that made my teeth hurt. "I know this might seem overwhelming, but let's be realistic here. You can't afford to fight me on this. I mean, really, what are you going to do? Hire some bargain basement lawyer with your maintenance supervisor salary?" She stood up and walked around the counter, getting close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume. The stuff I'd bought her for our last anniversary, back when I thought we were building something together instead of her just biding her time until something better came along. "Here's the thing," she continued, and now her voice dropped to almost a whisper, like she was sharing some intimate secret. "I'm about to have resources you can't even imagine. I can drag this out for years. I can hire the best lawyers in the state. I can make your life absolutely miserable until you give me what I want anyway." She paused, letting that sink in. "Or you can be smart about this and just sign the papers. Take whatever scraps I'm willing to leave you and move on with your life." Then she smiled, actually smiled, and delivered the line that I'll remember until the day I die. "You'll be bankrupt before you even get a decent lawyer to return your calls." She said it like she was doing me a favor, like she was some benevolent queen offering mercy to a peasant who'd somehow offended her. The smugness radiating off her was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. I sat there looking at this woman who'd shared my bed for 9 years, who'd cried in my arms when her dreams fell apart, who'd promised to love me for better or worse. And all I could think was, when exactly did she become this person? When did the woman I married turn into this cold, calculating stranger who was trying to destroy me just because she could? But here's the thing about being underestimated your whole life. People tend to make assumptions about what you're capable of. They see the work boots and the high school diploma and the modest paycheck, and they think they've got you all figured out. They think you're just some simple guy who doesn't know how the world really works. What Brielle didn't know, what she'd never bothered to learn in all our years together, was that I had connections she couldn't even imagine. Relationships built on respect and genuine affection, not just convenience and financial benefit. See, there was something I'd never told her about her own family. Something about her mother, Celeste Hollingsworth, that might have changed this whole conversation if Brielle had been paying attention to anyone other than herself. Celeste wasn't just any lawyer. She was the most feared divorce attorney in the entire city, maybe the whole state. The woman who'd taken down politicians and CEOs and anyone else who thought their money and power made them untouchable. And for the past 5 years, while Brielle was too proud and stubborn to maintain any relationship with her mother, I'd been the one keeping in touch. I'd been the one calling Celeste on her birthday, sending her Christmas cards, checking in when I heard she'd had surgery last year. Because unlike Brielle, I understood something important. You don't burn bridges with people who've shown you kindness, no matter what family drama might be swirling around. And Celeste, despite everything that had gone wrong between her and her daughter, she'd always liked me, really liked me. So as I sat there listening to Brielle's threats, watching her strut around like some corporate raider who'd just discovered a company ripe for hostile takeover, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt like smiling. Because she was right about one thing. This was going to be a war. But she'd made one crucial mistake in her battle planning. She'd assumed I'd be fighting it alone. For 3 days, I played the part Brielle expected me to play. I walked around the house like a beaten dog, shoulders slumped, barely making eye contact. I let her see me staring at those divorce papers like they were written in some foreign language I couldn't understand. I even caught her smirking a couple times when she thought I wasn't looking, probably thinking about how easy this was all going to be. Truth is, those 3 days weren't about playing defeated, they were about planning. While she was busy shopping online for furniture for her new place and texting God knows who about her upcoming windfall, I was thinking, really thinking, for the first time in months, about who I was and what I was worth. See, When someone you love tells you you're not good enough, it messes with your head. For those first few days after she dropped the divorce bomb, part of me actually believed her. Maybe I really was just some small-town guy who'd gotten lucky to land a woman like Brielle in the first place. Maybe she really was outgrowing me, and I should just be grateful for the 9 years I got. But by day 3, something shifted. I was sitting in my workshop in the garage. The same garage where I'd built her that jewelry workbench, where I'd stored all her failed business inventory, where I'd spent countless evenings fixing things while she complained about how manual labor wasn't sexy. I was holding this old photo of Celeste that I keep tucked behind my toolbox. It was from Brielle's college graduation, back when things were still good between mother and daughter. Celeste was wearing this sharp black suit that screamed, "Don't mess with me." But she had her arm around Brielle and was actually smiling. A real smile, not the polite lawyer smile I'd seen her use on other people. And there I was in the background, grinning like an idiot in my one good shirt, just happy to be part of what felt like a real family. That's when it hit me. Celeste had never treated me like I wasn't good enough. Ever. Not once in all the years I'd known her. When Brielle would make those little digs about my education or my job, Celeste would shut that shit down fast. "Jackson works harder in a week than most people work in a month," she'd say. Or, "Intelligence isn't measured by degrees, sweetheart." After Brielle and her mom had their big falling out, something about Celeste being too controlling and not supportive of Brielle's dreams, I was the only one who kept in touch. Christmas cards, birthday calls, checking in when I heard through the grapevine that she'd been working a particularly brutal case. Not because I was trying to score points or play some long game, but because she'd been good to me when she didn't have to be. And more importantly, because I respected what she represented. Here was a woman who'd built something real, something lasting, something that commanded respect in a world that didn't give respect easily. She'd earned every bit of her reputation through pure grit and intelligence, and she'd never once apologized for being better than everyone else in the room. On the 4th morning, I made my decision. Brielle had already left for some spa appointment. Gotta look good for all that new money, right? And the house was finally quiet. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I'd saved under Ms. C. We hadn't talked in maybe 4 months. Not since I'd called to congratulate her on winning some big case against a tech executive who tried to hide assets in cryptocurrency. My hands were actually shaking as I hit the call button. Not because I was scared of Celeste. I'd never been scared of her. But because this felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. Once I made this call, there was no going back to playing the nice guy who just wanted everyone to get along. She answered on the second ring. "Jackson Ward," she said, and I could hear that slight smile in her voice. "It's been a while." "Hey, Miss C," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, it has. How've you been?" "I've been better. I've been worse." Classic Celeste. Never wasted words on small talk. "You sound tired, Jackson." "Actually, you sound more than tired. You sound worn down." God, the woman could read people through the phone. "Yeah, well, it's been a rough week." "Brielle?" she asked, and there was something sharp in her voice now. "Brielle," I confirmed. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I could hear her breathing, could practically feel her lawyer brain spinning up, analyzing possibilities, calculating angles. Finally, she spoke. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about the inheritance, about the smug announcement that I wasn't good enough anymore, about the folder full of demands that would leave me with nothing. I told her about the threats, about Brielle's confidence that I couldn't afford to fight back, about how she'd looked at me like I was Psalm. Celeste didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, just let me get it all out. When I finished, the silence stretched so long I thought maybe the call had dropped. "Miss C? You still there?" "I'm here." Her voice was different now, colder, more focused. "Jackson, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do you have the court date and time?" "Yeah, it's next Tuesday at 9 a.m. Send me that information. Send me copies of everything she's filed." "And Jackson?" "Yes, ma'am." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer but somehow more dangerous than I'd ever heard it. "You won't be going into that courtroom alone. You understand me?" Yeah, I think so." "No, Jackson. I need you to understand completely. My daughter seems to have forgotten who raised her. She seems to think that having money means she can bulldoze over people who've shown her nothing but loyalty and kindness." Another pause. She's about to learn that blood doesn't always run thicker than respect. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. Miss C, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. She cut me off. I'm telling. Brielle wants to play hardball? Fine. But she picked the wrong game. And she definitely picked the wrong opponent. I heard papers rustling in the background. Heard her typing something on her computer. Jackson. Yes, ma'am. You said she told you that you couldn't afford to fight her? That's right. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I heard someone laugh. Really laugh. And it was the most beautiful, terrifying sound I'd ever heard. Well, Celeste said, she's about to find out just how wrong she was about that. Tuesday morning came with this nasty drizzle that made everything look gray and miserable, which, honestly, felt pretty appropriate for what was supposed to be the day my life got officially flushed down the toilet. I stood on those courthouse steps for a solid 5 minutes, just watching the rain beat up on my windshield, trying to psych myself up for whatever was about to happen. Celeste had been tight-lipped about her strategy. Just trust me, she'd said during our follow-up call. Show up looking exactly like the man Brielle thinks you are. Let her think she's already won. So there I was, wearing my second-best shirt and a tie I'd borrowed from my neighbor, playing the part of the overwhelmed maintenance guy who was about to get steamrolled by his soon-to-be ex-wife's superior resources. The courthouse lobby was buzzing with that particular brand of nervous energy you only get when people's entire lives are about to be decided by strangers in black robes. Lawyers strutting around in $1,000 suits. Families huddled together whispering about custody arrangements. Guys like me trying to look like they belonged in a place where justice supposedly lived. I found the right courtroom and slipped inside, taking a seat at what I assumed was the defendant's table. The whole place smelled like old wood and broken dreams, with those high ceilings that made every whisper echo like you were in some kind of cathedral. Only instead of praying for salvation, everyone was praying they wouldn't get completely screwed over. That's when I heard her laugh. Brielle's laugh used to make me smile. It was this light, musical sound that could lift my mood even after the worst days at work. But the laugh I heard echoing from across the courtroom, that was something else entirely. It was sharp, predatory, the kind of laugh that comes from knowing you're about to watch someone get destroyed and there's nothing they can do about it. She was sitting at the plaintiff's table, looking like she'd stepped out of some lawyer TV show. Designer suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. Hair done up in this perfect chignon that screamed, I have arrived. Makeup applied with the kind of precision that takes an hour and a professional. She looked confident, expensive, and completely untouchable. Next to her sat this guy who had to be her lawyer, Preston York, according to the nameplate on the table. Ivy League written all over him. From his perfectly pressed suit to his smug little smirk to the way he kept checking his Rolex like his time was way too valuable for this small-town courthouse drama. He was young, maybe early 30s, with that particular brand of arrogance that comes from never having your ass handed to you by someone who actually knows what they're doing. They were having this animated conversation, heads bent together like they were plotting world domination instead of just trying to steal my house and my truck. Every few seconds, one of them would glance over at me and chuckle, like I was the punchline to some private joke they'd been sharing. Then Preston stood up and walked over to my table, straightening his tie like he was about to deliver the performance of his career. Up close, he was even more obnoxious than I'd expected. Perfect teeth, perfect hair, and this condescending smile that made me want to punch him in his perfect face. Mr. Ward, he said, extending his hand like we were old buddies meeting for lunch. Preston York, representing Mrs. Ward. I have to ask, are you planning to represent yourself today? Or should I be expecting some competition? The way he said competition made it clear he wasn't expecting any. This was supposed to be a massacre, not a fair fight. I shook his hand, made sure to grip it just a little too tight, and looked him right in the eye. We'll see, I said. That seemed to amuse him even more. He chuckled and shook his head, like I was some kid who'd just said something adorable and naive. Well, I admire your confidence, I suppose. Though I have to warn you, divorce proceedings can be quite complex. Lots of legal nuances that might be challenging for someone without proper training. Before I could respond to that condescending bullshit, the bailiff called out, All rise. The Honorable Judge Margaret Chun presiding. We all stood as Judge Chun entered, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who looked like she'd seen every kind of human drama imaginable and wasn't impressed by any of it anymore. She settled behind her bench, adjusted her glasses, and called the case. Ward versus Ward, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. Are both parties ready to proceed? Preston practically bounced to his feet. Ready for the plaintiff, Your Honor. Judge Chin looked over at me expectantly, and I opened my mouth to say I was ready to represent myself. But before I could get the words out, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with this dramatic bang that made everyone turn around. And in walked Celeste. Jesus Christ, the woman knew how to make an entrance. She strode down that center aisle like she owned the place, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the rhythm of a countdown timer. Hair pulled back in this severe bun that meant business, wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my truck, carrying a briefcase that looked like it could double as a weapon. But it was her face that really got everyone's attention. Stone cold, laser focused. The expression of someone who'd walked into that courtroom with one purpose: total annihilation. The entire room went dead silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, could practically feel the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure as everyone realized they were witnessing something they weren't prepared for. Celeste walked past the gallery, past Brielle's table where Preston was now standing with his mouth hanging open like a fish, past all the other lawyers and court personnel who were staring at her like she was some kind of legal celebrity who'd just showed up unannounced. She stopped at my table, set down her briefcase with deliberate precision, and took the seat beside me. Then she looked directly at Judge Chun and announced in that crisp, commanding voice that could cut through steel, "Celeste Hollingsworth representing the defendant, Your Honor." The gasps were immediate and audible. Someone in the gallery actually whispered, "Holy shit," before catching themselves. Preston looked like he'd just been punched in the stomach, and Judge Chin's eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared under her hair. But the best part? The absolute best part was watching Brielle's face. All that confidence, all that smugness, all that certainty that she was about to steamroll me into financial oblivion. It just evaporated. Her mouth fell open, her eyes went wide, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, she looked genuinely scared. Celeste didn't acknowledge her daughter at first. Instead, she opened her briefcase, pulled out a stack of documents that looked thick enough to choke a horse, and arranged them on the table with the methodical precision of someone loading ammunition. Then, and only then, did she turn and look directly at Brielle. When she spoke, her voice was calm, professional, and absolutely terrifying. "Hello, sweetheart," she said. "You look surprised to see me. If you've never seen a courtroom freeze solid in real time, let me tell you, it's something you don't forget." The temperature in that room dropped about 20 degrees the moment Celeste spoke, and I swear you could have heard a pin drop in the back row. Everyone just sat there, processing what they'd just witnessed, trying to figure out if they were about to watch a routine divorce proceeding or the legal equivalent of a public execution. Judge Chun was the first to recover, clearing her throat and shuffling through her papers like she was buying time to figure out what the hell was happening in her courtroom. "Ms. Hollingsworth," she said, and there was this careful respect in her voice that told me everything I needed to know about Celeste's reputation. "This is unexpected. Are you certain you want to represent the defendant in this matter?" Celeste didn't even blink. "Absolutely certain, Your Honor. I've reviewed the case thoroughly, and I'm fully prepared to proceed." I glanced over at Brielle, and man, if looks could kill, her mother would have been a smoking crater. But underneath that anger, I could see something else: genuine fear. Maybe for the first time in this whole mess, Brielle was starting to realize she might have bitten off more than she could chew. Preston, meanwhile, looked like someone had just told him Christmas was canceled. All that Ivy League confidence had evaporated, and he was frantically whispering with Brielle, probably trying to figure out if there was some way to get a continuance or postpone the whole thing until they could regroup. But Celeste wasn't about to give them that chance. "Your Honor," she said, standing with the kind of fluid grace that comes from decades of commanding courtrooms. "Before we proceed with the plaintiff's requests, I'd like to present several motions on behalf of my client." She reached into that briefcase and pulled out what looked like a small novel's worth of legal documents. I'm talking thick stacks of paper, perfectly organized with those little colored tabs sticking out like a rainbow of legal warfare. "First," she continued, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel, I moved to reject each and every one of the plaintiff's demands as predatory, baseless, and malicious in nature. Preston shot to his feet so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. Your Honor, that's completely. Second, Celeste continued, not even acknowledging his interruption. I move for full asset audits of both parties, including forensic accounting of all financial transactions dating back to the time of the inheritance announcement. Objection, Preston practically shouted. These are fishing expeditions designed to. Third, Celeste pressed on, and now there was steel in her voice. I move for a complete breakdown and investigation of the plaintiff's spending habits and financial activities since receiving notification of her inheritance. Judge Chun was furiously taking notes, and I could see her trying to keep up with the rapid-fire legal assault Celeste was unleashing. Preston looked like he was drowning, opening and closing his mouth without any coherent words coming out. Your Honor, he finally managed. These motions are clearly retaliatory and… Are they? Celeste turned to face him for the first time, and the temperature in the room somehow managed to drop even further. Mr. York, are you suggesting that a thorough examination of my client's financial situation shouldn't be matched by an equally thorough examination of your client's activities? Are you perhaps concerned about what such an investigation might reveal? The way she said it made it sound like she already knew exactly what such an investigation would reveal, and it wasn't going to be pretty for Brielle. Preston's face was turning this interesting shade of red. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm simply pointing out that these broad, sweeping demands for financial records are standard practice in high-asset divorce proceedings, Celeste finished smoothly. Which this has become, given that my client's wife recently inherited a substantial sum of money. Surely you're not suggesting that we should proceed without a complete understanding of both parties' financial positions. Judge Chun looked back and forth between them like she was watching a tennis match, except one player was clearly getting their ass handed to them. Finally, she held up her hand. Ms. Hollingsworth, these are extensive requests. Are you prepared to argue the necessity of each motion? Absolutely, Your Honor. In fact, I believe the circumstances surrounding this case make such investigations not just advisable, but essential for ensuring justice is served. The way she emphasized justice made it sound like she was talking about something bigger than just my divorce. Like this was about principles, about right and wrong, about what happens when people think they can use money and power to steamroll over anyone they consider beneath them. Preston was desperately shuffling through his own papers, clearly trying to find some legal precedent or procedure that could slow down the freight train that was bearing down on his case. But Judge Chun was already nodding thoughtfully. Mr. York, do you have any objections to financial disclosure that go beyond standard practice? Well, Your Honor, the scope of these requests seems overly broad and… Overruled, Judge Chun said firmly. Given the significant change in the plaintiff's financial circumstances, I find these motions reasonable and appropriate. Full asset audits for both parties are approved. Forensic accounting is approved. And yes, Mr. York, a detailed breakdown of spending patterns since the inheritance notification is also approved. I watched Preston's shoulders slump like someone had just deflated him. Across the courtroom, Brielle was whispering frantically in his ear, but he just kept shaking his head, probably trying to explain to her that no, there wasn't some magic legal loophole that could make this all go away. Celeste gathered her papers with the same methodical precision she'd used to arrange them, each movement deliberate and controlled. When she sat back down beside me, she leaned over and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. The storm has arrived, Jackson, and your wife is about to learn what it feels like to be caught in the open with nowhere to hide. Looking back at Brielle's table, I could see Preston frantically scribbling notes, probably trying to figure out how to salvage a case that had just gotten blown wide open. Brielle herself looked like someone who'd just realized she'd brought a water gun to a tank fight. But the best part? The absolute best part was watching the realization slowly dawn on her face. For 9 years, she'd taken me for granted, assumed I was just some simple guy who didn't understand how the world really worked. She'd thought she could bulldoze right over me because I didn't have her connections, her resources, her sophisticated understanding of how to manipulate the system. What she'd never bothered to learn was that sometimes the quiet guy in the work boots has connections that run deeper than money. Sometimes loyalty and respect count for more than inheritance and attitude. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person you've underestimated your whole relationship turns out to be holding cards you never even knew existed. Celeste had declared war, all right. But I was just the quiet man holding the sword she'd handed me, and I was finally ready to use it. You know how they say the truth has a way of coming out? Well, when you've got Celeste Hollingsworth and her team digging into your business, the truth doesn't just come out. It gets dragged kicking and screaming into the light, stripped naked, and put on display for everyone to see. It took exactly 5 days for Celeste's people to tear through Brielle's financial life like bloodhounds following a scent trail. And let me tell you, what they found was way worse than anything I could have imagined during those long nights when I'd lie awake wondering how the woman I married had turned into such a stranger. Celeste had introduced me to her team the day after that first court hearing, and they were exactly what you'd expect from someone with her reputation. First was Yasmin, her paralegal, this sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who looked like she could spot a lie from 3 counties away and had the kind of smile that made you want to confess things you hadn't even done yet. Then there was Hank, the private investigator, who dressed like an accountant but had these predator eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Your wife's been busy, Yasmin had told me during our first meeting, spreading out bank statements across Celeste's conference table like she was laying out evidence at a crime scene. Real busy. The numbers were staggering. In the 3 weeks since she'd gotten word about the inheritance, money that hadn't even hit her account yet, Brielle had already spent over $180,000 on what the bank records politely called luxury goods and services. But when Hank started breaking down exactly what those purchases were, the picture that emerged was so much worse than just shopping sprees. Private jet rentals, 5-star resort stays in places I'd never even heard of, designer handbags that cost more than most people's cars, jewelry that could have paid off our mortgage twice over. But here's the kicker. She wasn't doing all this spending alone. There's a pattern here, Hank explained, pointing to a series of transactions with his pen. Every major purchase, every trip, every expensive dinner. They're all for 2 people. Your wife's been planning her exit strategy for a while now, and she's had help. That's when they showed me the consulting retainer. $50,000 paid to something called Blackwood Strategic Consulting, which sounded impressive until Hank explained what it really was. Trey Blackwood, he said, sliding a photograph across the table. 33 years old, calls himself an entrepreneur, which seems to be code for unemployed guy with good cheekbones. Part-time model, full-time user. Your wife met him at some yoga retreat in Costa Rica about 6 months ago. I stared at the photo, trying to process what I was seeing. The guy looked like he'd stepped out of some fitness magazine, all abs and perfect stubble, and the kind of confident smirk that probably worked on lonely housewives who were feeling underappreciated. Yasmin nodded grimly. According to the credit card records, she's been flying out to meet him every few weeks. Always told you it was for business conferences or girls' weekends, right? She was right, of course. I remembered those trips, remembered how excited Brielle would get about her networking opportunities and personal development seminars. I'd even encouraged her, thinking maybe she'd finally found something that would stick, something that would make her happy. Instead, she'd been using my support to fund her affair with some wannabe influencer who saw dollar signs the moment she mentioned her grandfather's money. But the consulting retainer was just the beginning. Celeste's team had dug deeper, following digital breadcrumbs that painted an even uglier picture. Hotel records showed Trey had been staying in the same luxury suites Brielle was booking. Restaurant charges revealed intimate dinners for 2 at places that cost more per meal than I made in a week. There were spa treatments, couples massages, wine tastings, a whole romantic fantasy funded by the inheritance she was so eager to protect from me. They've been planning their new life together, Celeste explained during one of our strategy sessions, her voice clinical, but her eyes blazing with controlled fury. Spain, apparently. Your wife and Mr. Blackwood have already put deposits down on a villa in Marbella. They were going to use the divorce settlement to fund their European adventure. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. It wasn't just that she'd been cheating, though that hurt like hell. It was the calculated nature of it all, the way she'd looked me in the eye every morning for 6 months, while secretly planning to destroy me and run off with some guy who probably couldn't spell commitment if you spotted him half the letters. But Celeste wasn't done. Her team had uncovered something even worse. something that crossed the line from betrayal into outright criminal behavior. Your wife forged your signature, Hank explained, sliding another document across the table. Joint investment account you two opened 3 years ago for that house renovation fund. She withdrew $92,000 2 weeks after she got news about the inheritance. I stared at the withdrawal slip, at my own signature that definitely wasn't my own signature, at the date that proved she'd been stealing from me while simultaneously planning to take everything else I owned. I started, then stopped, because I couldn't find words big enough for what I was feeling. That's felony fraud. Celeste finished for me, and there was something dangerous in her voice now. Identity theft. Forgery. Your wife isn't just trying to divorce you, Jackson. She's been systematically robbing you to fund her new relationship. The room went quiet as that sank in. Yasmin was organizing documents with the focused intensity of someone building a fortress out of evidence. Hank was making notes in his careful handwriting, probably already thinking about what other secrets might be hiding in Brielle's digital footprint. But Celeste was just sitting there, staring at that forged signature with the kind of expression I'd seen on her face in the courtroom. The look of someone who'd just been handed all the ammunition they needed to end a war. Your wife made a mistake, she said finally. Actually, she made several mistakes. But the biggest one was thinking she could outsmart the legal system while simultaneously committing crimes that leave paper trails. She gathered up the documents and slid them into a folder marked with Brielle's name. Mr. Blackwood is going to be very upset when he realizes his meal ticket comes with felony charges attached, she continued. And your wife is about to learn that when you try to destroy someone's life while committing fraud in the process, sometimes the person you're trying to destroy has friends who know exactly how to fight back. Looking at all that evidence spread across the table, the affair, the theft, the lies, the calculated cruelty of it all, I felt something shift inside me. For months, I'd been carrying around this guilt, wondering what I'd done wrong, how I'd failed as a husband, why I wasn't enough for the woman I'd loved. But seeing the truth laid out in black and white, I realized I'd been asking the wrong questions. It wasn't about what I'd done wrong. It was about what she'd chosen to become. And now, thanks to Celeste and her team, everyone was going to see exactly what that was. Celeste didn't gloat. Hell, she didn't even smile when we laid out all the evidence of Brielle's betrayal across her conference table like we were planning a military campaign. Instead, she just stared at those documents with the cold, calculating expression of a chess master who'd just realized her opponent had been playing checkers the whole time. Jackson, she said, tapping her pen against the table in this rhythmic way that somehow made the silence more ominous. There's something you need to understand about justice. It's not about revenge. It's not about making people pay for hurting you. It's about consequences. Natural, inevitable consequences for the choices people make. She stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city, her reflection ghost-like against the glass. Your wife made choices. She chose to betray you, to steal from you, to plan your destruction while smiling at you across the breakfast table. Now she gets to live with the consequences of those choices. The way she said it made my skin crawl, not because it was cruel, but because it was so completely matter-of-fact. Like Brielle's downfall was just another natural law, as predictable as gravity. What are you thinking? I asked. She turned back to face me, and there was something different in her eyes now. Something that made me glad I was on her side and not the other way around. I'm thinking we're going to let her sweat. For a month. Maybe 2. We're going to drag this out until she's so desperate she can't think straight. Over the next 4 weeks, Celeste orchestrated what I can only describe as legal warfare conducted with surgical precision. She didn't just attack Brielle's case. She systematically dismantled every aspect of her life, piece by piece, with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd been doing this for 30 years. First came the hearings. Not just 1 or 2, but a whole parade of them. Asset disclosure hearings where Brielle had to explain every single purchase she'd made since the inheritance announcement. Deposition scheduling conferences where Preston would show up thinking they were going to discuss simple procedural matters, only to get blindsided by Celeste's demands for sworn testimony from everyone in Brielle's orbit. Your Honor, Preston would stammer during these sessions, this level of scrutiny seems excessive for a straightforward divorce proceeding. And Celeste would respond in that crisp, unflappable voice. Your Honor, when one party has committed fraud and identity theft, no level of scrutiny is excessive. We're simply ensuring that justice is served. She made sure to say fraud and identity theft every single time, like she was hammering nails into a coffin. And Judge Chun, who was clearly getting tired of Preston's objections, would just nod and approve whatever Celeste requested. But the hearings were just the beginning. Celeste had weaponized the discovery process, turning it into this relentless machine that chewed through every aspect of Brielle's recent life. Bank records, credit card statements, hotel receipts, phone records, social media posts. Everything became evidence, and everything painted the same picture of calculated betrayal. The worst part for Brielle wasn't even the legal proceedings themselves. It was watching her carefully constructed social image crumble in real time. See, Celeste had made sure that all the evidence disclosures were public record. Anyone could walk into the courthouse and read about Brielle's affair, her fraud, her plans to flee the country with her boy toy. And in a town like ours, that kind of information spreads faster than wildfire. I started hearing about it from people at work. "Hey Jackson," the assistant principal would say, "saw in the paper about your divorce. Sounds like your wife really stepped in it." The maintenance crew would give me these knowing looks, like they wanted to say something supportive but didn't know how to bring up the fact that my wife had been publicly exposed as a cheating thief. But the real damage was happening in Brielle's social circle. These were people who'd known her for years, who'd been impressed by her inheritance news, who'd probably been a little jealous of her sudden good fortune. Now they were reading court documents that revealed her as someone who'd forged her husband's signature to steal money for her affair. Her friends started distancing themselves, not just because of the scandal, but because they were scared they might get dragged into the legal mess as witnesses. Celeste had already deposed 3 of them, asking pointed questions about what they knew about Trey when they knew it, and whether they'd helped Brielle hide anything from me. The depositions were masterpieces of psychological warfare. Yasmin would prep each witness, explaining exactly what perjury meant and what the penalties were, making it crystal clear that lying under oath to protect Brielle wasn't worth risking their own futures. Then Celeste would walk into those conference rooms like a surgeon with a scalpel, dissecting their testimony with questions so precise and relentless that even innocent bystanders ended up feeling guilty. "Mrs. Patterson," she'd say to one of Brielle's yoga buddies, "you testified that you believed Mrs. Ward's trips to Costa Rica were for business. But you also testified that she showed you photos of herself and Mr. Blackwood together at romantic dinners. Help me understand how those 2 facts reconcile." One by one, Brielle's friends either turned on her completely or distanced themselves so far they might as well have moved to another state. The woman who'd been planning to use her inheritance to buy her way into a higher social class found herself more isolated than she'd ever been in her life. Meanwhile, Celeste was building our case like she was constructing a fortress. Every document was cataloged. Every witness statement was cross-referenced. Every piece of evidence was organized into this comprehensive narrative that painted Brielle not just as a cheating wife, but as a criminal who'd systematically betrayed the one person who'd stood by her through everything. The motion to recover the stolen funds came with interest calculated down to the penny. The motion to reverse all of Brielle's claims on the house and car came with legal precedents cited from 3 different states. The motion for her to pay my legal fees came with a detailed breakdown of every hour Celeste's team had spent undoing the damage Brielle had tried to cause. Preston was drowning. You could see it in his face every time he walked into a hearing, the way his confidence had evaporated and been replaced by this desperate, panicked energy. He was way out of his league, trying to defend the indefensible against someone who'd forgotten more about divorce law than he'd ever learned. "Your Honor," he'd plead during one particularly brutal hearing, "my client is willing to discuss settlement terms." But Celeste would just shake her head. "Settlement implies that both parties have something to negotiate with, Your Honor. The plaintiff has nothing to offer except a promise to stop breaking the law." Judge Chun, who'd clearly lost all patience with the situation, would just sigh and approve whatever Celeste had requested. The woman was getting a front row seat to what happened when someone tried to game the legal system against an opponent who actually knew how to use it. By the end of that month, Brielle looked like a completely different person. Gone was the confident woman who'd sat across from me demanding everything I owned. In her place was someone who looked tired desperate, and very, very scared. And Celeste? She was just getting started. The phone call came on a Thursday night, just after I'd finished dinner and was settling in to watch some mindless TV. When I saw Brielle's name on my caller ID, I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken directly since that morning she'd slid those divorce papers across our kitchen table, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear whatever desperate scheme she'd cooked up now. But curiosity got the better of me. Or maybe it was something darker than that. Maybe I wanted to hear the fear in her voice, wanted to know that all of Celeste's surgical precision was finally getting through that wall of entitlement Brielle had built around herself. Jackson, her voice was different, smaller. The confidence that had been practically dripping off her during those early weeks was completely gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like the woman I'd married 9 years ago. Brielle. I kept my voice neutral, giving her nothing to work with. She paused, and I could hear her breathing, could practically feel her searching for the right words. I know things have gotten complicated between us. Complicated. Like that was some neutral term that could somehow minimize the fact that she cheated on me, stolen from me, and tried to destroy my life while planning her escape with her boy toy. That's one way to put it, I said. Jackson, please. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I never wanted. Another pause, longer this time. Look, maybe we can work something out. Maybe we can settle this whole thing without all the lawyers and the court dates and the publicity. Publicity. That's what she was really worried about. Not the hurt she'd caused me, not the years of lies and manipulation, but the fact that her dirty laundry was being aired in public for everyone to see. I'm listening, I said, though I wasn't really. I was already reaching for the second phone, the one Celeste had given me specifically for this kind of situation. I was thinking, Brielle continued, and now there was this forced brightness in her voice, like she was trying to sell me on some new business idea. I was thinking maybe I was a little harsh with my initial requests. Maybe we could find some middle ground. You could keep the house, and I could take a smaller share of the savings. Maybe we could work out something with the car. She kept talking, laying out this revised proposal that was still designed to screw me over, just with a gentler touch. Smaller theft instead of complete robbery. A kinder, more considerate way of destroying my life. But I wasn't really listening to the details. I was thinking about 6 months of planning, about forged signatures and secret trips and romantic dinners funded with money stolen from our joint account. I was thinking about the way she'd looked at me that night, like I was something she needed to scrape off her shoe. Brielle, I said, cutting her off mid-sentence. Hold on a second. I picked up the second phone and dialed Celeste's number. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been expecting this call. Jackson, it's Brielle, I said simply. She wants to settle. There was a moment of silence. Then I heard something that might have been laughter. Put me on speaker, Celeste said. I switched the phone to speaker mode and set it down on my coffee table. Brielle, you there? Yes, I'm. Her voice trailed off as she realized what was happening. Hello, Brielle. Celeste's voice filled my living room, crisp and professional and absolutely terrifying. I understand you'd like to discuss settlement terms. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if Brielle had hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Mom, Ms. Hollingsworth will be fine, Celeste replied, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Now, about this settlement you're proposing. I just thought, maybe we could work something out that's fair for everyone. Jackson's a good man, and I never wanted to hurt him. And maybe if we could just... Stop. Celeste's voice cut through Brielle's rambling like a blade. Just stop. Do you know what settling means, Brielle? Settling is a privilege. It's something that happens between parties who have something to negotiate with, who come to the table in good faith, who haven't spent months committing fraud and identity theft. I could hear Brielle's breathing getting faster, more panicked. Settlement is for people who made mistakes, not people who made choices, Celeste continued. You didn't accidentally have an affair. You didn't accidentally forge your husband's signature. You didn't accidentally plan to flee the country with your boyfriend using money you stole. These were deliberate, calculated decisions. But you what? You're sorry? You didn't mean for it to go this far. Celeste's voice was getting colder, more clinical. You meant for it to go exactly this far. You meant to destroy Jackson's life, take everything he owned, and disappear with your paramour. The only thing you didn't mean was to get caught. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Here's what's going to happen, Celeste said finally. This case is going to trial. You're going to sit in that courtroom while I present every piece of evidence we've collected. Every forged signature, every secret trip, every lie you told, every dollar you stole. The judge is going to hear about your affair, your fraud, your systematic betrayal of the one person who supported you through everything. Please, Brielle whispered, and now she was crying. Please, I can't. I can't go through with this. The whole town already knows. Everyone's talking about me. I can't. You should have thought about that before you decided to commit felonies to fund your love affair, Celeste replied without a trace of sympathy. You made your choices, Brielle. Now you get to live with the consequences. The line went quiet except for the sound of Brielle's sobbing. Mom, please. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt Jackson, but he's like family to you. Doesn't that count for something? Can't you just? Jackson is like family to me, Celeste interrupted. You, on the other hand, are someone who betrayed family, who used the people who loved her to destroy someone good and decent and loyal. I don't represent people like that. I destroy them. And with that, she hung up. I sat there in my living room, listening to Brielle cry through the phone, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the smug look on her face when she told me I couldn't afford to fight her, remembered the way she'd planned my destruction while I was making her breakfast every morning. Brielle, I said quietly. Jackson, please, she sobbed. You know me. You know I'm not really like this. The money, it made me crazy. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can work it out. No, I said. We can't. Because this isn't about mistakes, Brielle. This is about choices. And you chose to become someone I don't recognize. I hung up the phone and sat back in my chair, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I knew exactly where I stood. The trial was going to happen. Justice was going to be served. And Brielle was going to learn that actions have consequences, even when you're rich enough to think they don't. The trial was the massacre. Pure and simple. Celeste presented everything. The affair, the forged signatures, the stolen money, the elaborate plan to flee to Spain with Trey. She laid it all out with the precision of a surgeon, each piece of evidence building on the last until there was no doubt about what Brielle had become. Judge Chin didn't just rule in my favor. She seemed personally offended by what she'd heard. Brielle had to pay back every stolen dollar with interest. She lost all claims to the house, the car, everything. And she had to cover my legal fees, which by then were substantial. But the worst part for Brielle wasn't the financial judgment. It was watching her reputation get destroyed in real time. Judge Chun actually praised Celeste's professionalism and integrity, while Brielle stood there red-faced, exposed, and completely alone. Preston looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Trey? He'd already ghosted her the moment he realized she wasn't getting the settlement money he'd been counting on. After it was over, Brielle tried one last desperate play. She waited outside the courthouse and approached her mother, tears streaming down her face. Mom, please. I know I messed up, but you're still my mother. We can fix this, can't we? Celeste looked at her daughter with the same cold expression she'd worn throughout the trial. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but cutting. You betrayed the only man who ever truly believed in you, Brielle. You used me, manipulated the legal system, and tried to destroy someone good and decent just because you could. I raised you better than that, but apparently I failed. She paused, adjusting her briefcase strap. I don't raise cowards, and I don't associate with criminals. That's exactly what you've become. Those were the last words Celeste ever spoke to her daughter. Brielle moved out of state within a month, her inheritance intact, but her life in ruins. Her friends had abandoned her, her reputation was destroyed, and her mother, the one person who might have helped her rebuild, wanted nothing to do with her. Justice, it turned out, was exactly as cold and inevitable as Celeste had promised. 6 months later, life looks nothing like I expected it would. Celeste and I have stayed close, closer than I ever imagined possible. What started as a professional relationship has grown into something deeper, something I'm still trying to wrap my head around. We're taking it slow, both of us smart enough to know that relationships built on the wreckage of others need solid foundations. We spend weekends together at the cabin her father left her up in the mountains, working with our hands to restore something beautiful that time had weathered. She's surprisingly good with power tools, And I've discovered she makes incredible coffee and tells stories that make me laugh until my sides hurt. Last month, she invited me to some fancy legal gala as her date. My favorite client, she introduced me as, with this subtle smile that made every lawyer in the room wonder what they were missing. As for me, I've gone back to school part-time, studying carpentry design at the community college. Turns out I've got a real talent for it. Who knew all those years of fixing things had been preparing me for something bigger? I'm not rich, probably never will be, but I've got something more valuable: peace of mind and self-respect. The house feels different now too. It's mine again, really mine, filled with furniture I built and memories I'm proud of. Sometimes I catch myself smiling for no reason at all, just grateful to be exactly where I am. Brielle thought I was beneath her, that I couldn't afford to fight someone with her resources and ambition. She thought wrong about a lot of things, but mostly she was wrong about what makes a person valuable. Her betrayal gave me something I never expected: freedom, clarity, and a family I actually chose. She tried to destroy me because she thought she could, but I never had to fight alone. I had someone who believed in me when it mattered most. Her name was Celeste, and she changed everything.